Good morning. Well, actually, sorry, almost good afternoon. I just got out of bed like an hour ago, so it's still morning for me. But thank you for choosing this of all. I looked at the lineup of all the talks this hour, and I literally like almost threw my phone against the wall. I was like, Rich is gonna go wax about space for an hour, and people are gonna listen to me talk about Aspire? No, but I'm glad people did show up. And so, yeah, so I'm Maddie. I am the product owner, whatever that means, of Aspire, of .NET Aspire. I'm on the .NET team. My boss owns the entire .NET platform, so that's kind of where we sit. I work really closely with internet celebs and notorious memers, David Fowler and Damian Edwards, and a lot of the .NET guys, and I came in to basically babysit them because they started doing this thing, and then they kept doing it, and then all of a sudden they shipped it, and they were like, we need an adult in the room, instantly. I hope they don't watch this on YouTube. Sorry, guys, love you. Okay. And so there's a lot about Aspire. We've been talking about it in about 800 different ways because we still don't actually know how to describe it in under like an hour-long talk. We're getting there. We're getting there. Sometimes we can do it in like 15, 20 minutes, but it is part of .NET, and I think what's important to know about Aspire is it's not like a new language, right? It's not a new thing. It's not a Blazor or a Maui. It is part of the ecosystem. And we'll sometimes use the word platform, but it's not something you have to re-platform onto, okay? This is why we have such a hard time describing it. There is no word for it. It is just a magical unicorn of things. But it really, we look at it kind of as half runtime platform stuff and half a developer tool, right? And so keep that in mind as we go through this. I'm sure you all build some form of apps. Maybe perhaps you write code. Maybe that is why you are here. And as you've probably witnessed in the last decade or so, as we've had this whole like cloud shift, and also as the internet has become a more and more chaotic place, apps need to do a lot of things, and they are kind of difficult. I was a mobile developer before I came over to Aspire. I was on the Maui team. Some of you may know me from my firstborn child over there, who I still love dearly. You love your children equally, right? Right? Thank you. And I started, just like, I was like, I'll see if I can just build and deploy a web app. Mobile's a whole other thing. I got that down. And then all of a sudden someone was like, what are you going to do for like your resiliency? Well, how are you going to manage it if you have to scale? And I was like, what? This is a sample app. What are you talking about? And they were like, it's not a sample app unless it actually kind of feels real, right? And you start poking around the .NET documentation and you realize there is a lot in the box for you, but nobody tells you how to turn these on or which to turn on, or when you do turn them on, what you should do to set them up right. And there's just a bunch of stuff. And so all of a sudden, all of us have started this project, right? Like where you start an app and you have a data source and you're like, cool, F5, sick. Works, right? And then you add a couple APIs, and then you do the thing where you like have to do multiple startup projects in VS, or if you're like me, you just open 6 terminal tabs and you do .NET run, and then you're like, cool, it's working. And the next thing you know, you're like, oh, I need an event bus. Oh my God, I'm going to throw up, like instantly. And then now we're in this AI world, and I think I'm paid on like the amount of times I mention AI per hour. So AI. The thing about Aspire is like AI or not, apps are tough. And AI just makes apps harder. And you'll see Sanderson on Friday in the morning talk about Microsoft Extensions AI and some of the tooling stuff we're doing there. And the thing about AI apps for us, people were like, well, you have to build AI tooling. I'm like, anything that makes building an app in the cloud easier is AI tooling. Because that app is most likely running in a cloud, whether it is on-prem or in Azure or in AWS or whatever it is, right? So then you all have to become experts in all this, or at least one thing from each of these boxes. And so it's all teeny, and they're all fake words. I'm sure you all know this. So like database, there's one called, I can't even read it, Tide. How am I supposed to know that's a database, right? Some Flux, Argo, these words, they're like just startup words. Platform stuff, of course, those ones are a little bit more familiar. Various storage, Longhorn, that is an American steakhouse. It is apparently also a cloud-native storage solution, okay? And so now you and your team, or whoever is tasked with this, has to go pluck one of these from each of these different sections, and then figure out how they work, figure out if it's the best thing, go to your boss and say, buy me the license for this thing, or if it's open source, this is why we're using this thing. and then explain why using words like longhorn. But this is just the world, right? Because nobody has actually standardized these things. And I don't think they need to be standardized. I honestly think the bigger this grows, the better it is for all of us. Because if we just had one kind of dominant solution, the cloud is moving so fast, at some point it would stall out, right? I think competition is good. It just makes it hard for us, all of the app developers, to not like scream every time we open up our computer in the morning. And so that is where Aspire comes in. And what we have been, the latest definition, the latest one-liner, if you will, of Aspire, is it's tools, templates, and packages for building observable and production-ready apps. Observable and production-ready are just the adjectives we chose to make it sound like, you know, big boy apps, big girl apps. We tried to use modern, and people were like, that sounds like the Windows 8 thing. And I was like, oh my God, I can't say anything. Meanwhile, these people are naming things Helm. Oh. I love Helm, no hate. But really what Aspire is about is taking your setup, however you have chosen to set it up, all your things, and making it easier for you to just develop, right? One of our customers said to me last week, and I swear I'm gonna get it tattooed on my forehead, it has let our developers just be developers again. And I was like, Steven, thank you, that was very good. So really it's about taking and not changing things, not forcing you into our things, not locking you into any one ecosystem, not locking you into a platform or a cloud or whatever it is, but just bootstrapping stuff in a way that makes you get off the ground. And it's all code. And so that means you can break out of anything at any time and not have to worry about, you know, oh, well, my DevOps person said that now we're shipping development helper code and they're getting mad at us. No, you don't. Ripping out Aspire is not like an actual thing, and we'll show you that. One of the coolest things about Aspire is that we say opinionated a lot. All opinionated means is we turn on what we think you should probably turn on if you're building a .NET or otherwise app, JavaScript, Python. We have support for all different things, including OpenTelemetry, which is the kind of what we took the bet on, and it was totally the right bet, and that paid off. OpenTelemetry is awesome. And yeah, we turn things on, and then when you start to understand how things work or need specific things, you say, okay, I have this OpenTelemetry thing. I actually need to swap it out with my own ingester. We're gonna put it on this dashboard or whatever it is. I'm gonna go figure that thing out today. I'm not gonna go figure out everything. And so, the best way to talk about Aspire is to clicker. Is this dead? Is to look at it. Before we jump into an app, generally, how we describe Aspire is in two ways. One is the developer machine, which is where most of the story is right now. You have an app host in C#. App host is like your local orchestrator. It's kind of like Docker Compose on crack. It's probably not a good one for YouTube. Hi again, YouTube. And then we give you a local dashboard that actually shows you how everything plugs in together. And then you can pull down NuGets to do whatever you want. So if you have insert cloud native solution for data storage here, you can go online and find some integration for it, or build one yourself and plug it in, and it will do the bootstrapping and the spinning up and all of those things for you. And so Aspire also has a deployment story. It's the reason I put this on a big hot pink box is to make you know that these two things are not like tied together, right? You can do the local stuff if you have your own deployment. I know I've heard from almost every customer I've talked to that when we're like, yeah, have you thought about using their deployment? They're like, no, our deployment works, and if I touch it, it will break, and it will never work again. And so we get that. The deployment is really for people who have greenfield apps, people who don't have a DevOps team, what I've been calling the do-it-all dev, right? When your boss is like, cool, spin this up. Okay, cool, ship it. And you're like, what? And then we have the option to see the dashboard in Azure, which we'll look at too. But the deployment story is really our focus for this year. It's cooking. Right now it's just Azure, but Aspire does support all clouds. So we're looking at how to deploy in other ways, but we'll get to that later. Let's just look at the app. I am going to use Visual Studio, and I'm not going to complain about my computer, because every time I do, it stops working. And just for the record, any Mac users? Any Mac homeboys? Yeah. I am, my first day at Microsoft 7 years ago, they handed me a Mac, and I said, I'm sorry, what company is this? Am I in the wrong place? And they said, you need to learn how iOS development works. And I said, thank you, sir. I don't think this is the right fit for me. Many years later, let me share my screen. I am almost fully a Mac convert because I started on command line, and I used to think having Linux was like really cool and fun. And then, I started to love myself, and so I stopped. But let me unplug and replug here. I just feel more familiar with Mac at this point. Oh my God, bro. There you go. I feel, what? Are you possessed? I'm telling you it's because I said something about my computer. And this is just what happens. I feel more familiar with Mac, and so for the record, for the Macs of you in the room, I do almost all of my personal Aspire toying around in development on VS Code on a Mac. But Visual Studio Windows is a much more elegant thing to demo. So, all right. When you install .NET in Visual Studio, you get Aspire. It's part of it. It's part of it. And then you're going to make, we're going to just do the starter app. And since I recently reformatted this is actually Aspire App 1 instead of Aspire App 710, which is usually where we're at. What you'll notice is that Aspire has a version that is separate from the .NET version. And because Aspire is out of band, because shit changes way too fast for us to release once a year. And I think you all probably have felt that pain. What that means, though, is that we support both the LTS and the latest .NET. So if you are on .NET 8, because you are like, nope, took me 6 months, I'm not doing it again, you can still use Aspire. And Aspire is always tip, right? Like the latest is what's supported because we have to rev the packages, which makes sense because the packages keep changing. Also because it's relatively new, so we keep fixing things. And so every release, it's better, So I would update. And then the other thing you're going to see here is use Redis for caching. Gasp. And I'm going to check that off because I want it to create this for me. And so what this is going to do now is create your Blazor API starter app. And it's going to add 2 projects. One is the Aspire app host, which, like I said, is that local orchestrator. It's all C#. And one, no, do not update. Do not update. Oh my God. I have a Windows update too. I'm terrified. It's this Aspire app host, right? And in here we have the program file. Come on, it's okay. That is going to describe kind of what my app is, right? And then the other project is the service defaults, which is where we turn things on. And so it's all code. So what you'll see about the program file here, let me zoom in a little bit. How do I zoom in? That's how I zoom in. Is that this is just C#. First of all, no squiggly braces anymore in C#. It's kind of cool. You can write a file that's just like system out, right line, hello world, and it just runs. It's very weird as someone who's used to things being indented 6 times before you get to the code. What we have here is just the builder pattern you use with the web apps or whatever, but it's actually describing your app. And so you can see I have, in this case, the cache, add Redis. And that is a NuGet integration that supports turning on and wiring up a Redis cache locally on my device. And then I have my projects added as good old project references, and we're giving them these magic strings here, which I'll show you how we use in a sec. And then I'm doing some cool interconnecting here. So my web front end has references to both the cache and the API service. And so before we look at all the other stuff, I'm going to run it, because then you can see why that's cool. Oh, and Docker is not open. Oh, and then that's actually going to make it a better demo. Nailed it. OK, awesome. That's the one thing I always forget to do is open Docker. But we just fixed that in the last release of Aspire, where it actually starts, and then it just says, Docker's not open yet. And you're like, whoa, oh my God, you're so smart. Thank you. Thank you so much. So what this is doing is building both the app host and all of those dependent projects. And so instead of doing the control, blah, 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 F5 bunch of things, it is building all of it. And it's wiring up the debugger through all of it. So I don't have to attach the debugger to all the different processes here. I can use it once. And I'm going to go into my browser, and I'm going to see that I have now my API service, which is running well and good. Notice this is localhost, right? Like this is not anywhere on the internet. And then I have an unhealthy runtime because Docker isn't started, so it can't make that container. And my web front end, which knows it needs that Redis cache, is not even going to try to turn on yet because it is like, nope, I am going to fail. So we're going to open Docker, give it a second to cook up. Everything's going to work perfectly. My computer is actually amazing. It is the best. It has never had an issue with WSL before. And as Docker starts up, what Aspire actually does is it pulls the base image we think you should use for Redis, right, from that integration, which again, you can override. There's properties for everything. It's just C#. And it pulls that image, that container, plops it into Docker locally, spins it up, and then does service discovery with all this stuff so that they can actually all talk to each other. And so when I go to my web front end, click. The weather demo is the interesting one. This is the weather. And you saw it took a second to click up there. But if I keep clicking back to it, right, it's like instant now. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Because it's cached. Because Redis is running in a container right here that you just saw me open Docker. Like I didn't do anything magic, right? It feels very magical. It is not. That's another reason that makes it very hard to describe. People are like, what are you doing under the hood? And I'm like, literally nothing. Like, it's all there. It feels so good. And what I can do now in my dashboard is go and see what in God's name is actually happening in this app. And so what I'll do first is I will look at this web front end and show you that I can see all these details here. We have health checks built into .NET. We turn them on for you, and then it tells you your thing is healthy. What? You can overwrite them, and you can say, this thing is only healthy if it's been up for 30 seconds, and it does, Rick rolls at least one customer, right? You can do whatever you want, but by default. And then we have a bunch of environment variables that set stuff up. And so in this case, there's a ton for open telemetry. We'll show you why that's cool too. But there's also these ones that reference the API service, which has, in this case, in this example, I believe it has like a statically set localhost, but you can just get rid of that and it will do it. And also the cache, the Redis cache connection strings, and any database passwords, if you're doing Postgres, any of that stuff. All that just gets shoved in as an environment variable. And then your project has it all. And so what I can do here is go and say, like, hey, let's see what's going on. And go look at the logs for each individual part of my app. And actually, in this case, I'm going to show you all of them, because this is just digesting the console and giving it to you in a readable way, right? And then it gives you the traces. So you can go and see, this is all one big trace here, it looks like. So we'll go click on that. Actually, how long these things are taking, where they're getting stuck. The cache, in this case, you can see it was 2.21 milliseconds to get it out of the cache. It doesn't even hit the get until later. Magic. And then you can go and see all of the metrics for these resources. And this is where the open telemetry magic happens, right? This is all built into .NET, all of this. Like .NET Core, sorry, framework people, Aspire works with framework. It just doesn't turn any of this on because none of this exists. Works is a strong word too, but it does spin up a framework project. But you have all these things in .NET now that we have just turned on and wired up. And I could clone, I just file newed it, right? But I could clone this repo from any of your machines, and it would just do it. And now I can see things like this is the number of times the JIT compiler compiled a method since the process start, which I would never, ever spend any effort writing a telemetry point for, but is probably useful to have. Other things about the dashboard, I don't know, there's a lot in here. It's very cool. Honestly, sometimes I use it just to read the consoles in one place instead of having to look through 4 terminals. I find that very helpful. And then you can extend it. So in here, you can restart. You can restart any individual part of it. You can stop things and see what happens if something goes into a failure state, how your app is going to react. And then you can also do hot reload. So in this case, like the weather page, right? This is this. Let's go. into the API, perhaps. Is this hard-coded in here somewhere? Oh, no, gross. Well, I'm not going to do it that then. We're just going to go to the web app. Oh, no, this is the API service. I just don't know how to read. And what we're going to do is we're going to change this to, I don't know, Maddie, 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 Maddie again. And then we'll keep the other ones, because like statistically that should be enough. So I'm going to hit save if you're smart and you have hot reload on save on. Otherwise, hit the hot reload button. Go a sec. Refresh. Hello. Oh, this is cache now. Hold on. Uncache. Uncache. Restart. Oh. It's going to call the cache. It's going to be like, where on God's name is this cache? Where's Maddie? Did I miss one? Hold on. Let's do this. Let's do it this way. F12. Right click, empty cache. Now it's hitting the endpoint again. Oh my God, where is Maddie? I wonder if this might be in memory somewhere, but this should also be telling me this is hot reloading. If you didn't know this, by the way, if you're a hot reloader and you're getting mad, oh yeah, it's not finding any changes. That's a bug. And that is why you use preview during your demos, so you can find them. This is the magic for those of you who have a hard time with hot reload. There is a whole output window now where all of the hot reload error messages go. We wired them all up. This was like a year of my life. I cannot tell you how many times I drank a glass of wine at the end of the day, because we have like 6 hot reloads in Visual Studio. We have obviously C#, we have XAML, we have CSS, we have the like other Blazor one, which is sort of like C# because Razor compiles, but it's also not. And then we have some other random stuff in there, and they were all going to different output windows, and so you could never figure out why things weren't working. And so we put them all in the same output window, but this one doesn't work, so it's okay. Hot reload does work, and then I bet if I was to restart this API here, such as just a quick little restart, right? That will, oh, that was quick. That's concerningly quick, actually. There we go. Now it has the changes. So, wow, that was really fast. See, my computer's amazing, I told you. Okay, that's the dashboard. If we look in the code here, and now I have to find the stop button when this is wicked zoomed in, which is like the most impossible task of all time. There's not much going on in these .NET projects, but we did do a couple things to like basically turn things on. And so in this case, the only development code we have here, which isn't even development code because you should run a lot of this stuff in production, is the add service defaults method. And that comes in from our service defaults extensions project. And so we just add this when you create an Aspire app. You can delete it. You can completely delete this file. You can put whatever you want in there. But you, via this, do things like add service discovery, add health checks, configure OTel. We give you some metrics. Like, look at all this stuff. This is stuff you'd have to figure out how to do if you wanted to turn any of these things on. And instead of doing it, you just do not, and we do it for you. And then you can take this and edit it and extend it, whatever, take it out of your app. And we split these out of the app host because they are not only for development, right? So we don't want you to have to package things that are like development only because DevOps people panic about it. I don't know if any of you have had that moment. So, this is kind of separated. It's another one of the packages of Aspire, the things you can plug and play if you want to. And then in the app host, it's super simple. We looked at this already. But I do want to call out, I can add much more than just .NET projects. I'm not going to do a polyglot demo today because time. Maybe if we have time, I will. Ooh. But you can add Node apps. So if you're someone with a JavaScript front end and a .NET back end, you can do Node, NPM, Vue, Vite, React, whatever the flavor of the week is for JavaScript, and Python. And so those are in the box with like our first-party extensions, integrations. Oh, bad. We used to call them components. I keep calling them components. They're called integrations. And then you can also pull in a bunch of ones, like there are ones that the community maintains in our toolkit, which we'll talk about for like Java, Go, Rust, Dino, which is another JavaScript thing with a little dinosaur. It's very cute. I don't understand it. So that's a whole part of this. Also, you can go in and add strings, like just URLs to endpoints that you want to hit. You can use Docker files. So if you have your own very particular container, then you don't want to have to deal with seeing if our stuff works with it. You just shove your Docker file in the project file, in the program, in the app host. There's a whole lot of stuff you can do. And just to give you an idea of the amount of integrations we have, let's manage our NuGet package. And I'm going to have to see, yeah, OK. This is the good NuGet package explorer. Actually, if I right-click on the solution, no, browse. Let's do it this way. And you just do owner Aspire. Do I have to not put the space in it? No, that's it. These are all Aspire integrations. A bunch. RabbitMQ, Dapper, Data SQL Client, AWS, Orchestration, SignalR. Like, it's just, it goes on forever. You will notice that some of them say hosting, and some of them do not. Aspire hosting integrations are NuGet packages you pull into the app host project to turn things on and wire them up. Aspire client integrations, the one that don't say hosting, are what you put in your projects to do some magic things if you want to. You don't have to do that. You can just use the regular thing, and they all subclass, right? Like the package library. So the Aspire Postgres package is just Postgres with a couple other methods on top of it. We don't rebuild them. I would barely even call it a wrapper. It's like a little bit on top of it. But those will help you do the just quick initialization of things and the quick service discovery. So the other thing I'm doing here, and by I mean the person who wrote the sample file new app, which was not actually me. So the other thing we are doing here is we are using a string to connect to an endpoint. And that is crazy. And all this is, all API services, and it's saying do HTTPS if it's available, and then if not, do the unsecure one. All that is doing is saying, find the thing with the magic string called API service, and that's my endpoint. I don't care where you put it. I don't care what port it's on. That's the endpoint. That's the endpoint. And the same thing is happening with the Redis cache, right? So in this case, add Redis output cache is the Aspire client integration. That's the one that goes into the project. And this is just wiring everything up to the cache. So anyways, slides for a second. This one. We're going to dive into what all of these different pieces are a little bit via slides, because then I actually have to stay on track instead of just rambling and pointing at things. And then we're going to do another demo of like an adult app. An app for adults, if you will. The inner loop, this is that program file. And so Aspire really is plug and play. You don't have to use any of it except the app host, right? This is really the foundation of things. But as you saw, it's a separate project. You can, if you have a Docker Compose file, you can make the app host turn on the Docker Compose file. I don't care. Do whatever you want. Do whatever you want. Just, you have to have the app host somewhere. And it could be as simple as this. But then you add things like your API that we saw. And then you add something, like I said, your web front end, right? So this pulls in the NPM integration, and it just points to the repository where the JavaScript entry point stuff is, probably where the package.json is, right? And now I have my web front end. And then with that, it's just environment variables. There's nothing magic happening. So I can reference my API and do the same kinds of things in the JavaScript app that you just saw with the .NET app. And then you can do something like add the integrations. And so in this case, I did Azure Storage, right? A lot of people ask about this because storage is always difficult. And with storage integrations, you add the general storage and then you add the type. So this case, we did blobs, but you can do whatever you want. Also, is blobs not the funniest name for storage? Does anyone else think that? Blobs. So, oh God, we're professional developers. We are. I'm not. I'm a PM. And then you can do the same thing with reference, wait for, blah, 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 blah. You can also do some cool things with containers for your development time in the app host that make your life suck less, such as not tearing everything down and spinning it all back up every single time. And so this is particularly helpful with something that is a heavy startup time. Redis is really quick, so it's not a good demo, but like a database that takes a couple seconds to spin up. Those things you can actually tell it when I stop debugging my app host, or when I stop my app host, or when I close that browser tab, don't kill that container in Docker. Just leave that running, keep the connection strings the same, and make sure that you inject those back in when I start up again, right? And that's how we enable the things like just starting an individual project too. So that's a good thing to know. And then you can also build custom commands in. And you can actually package these up as NuGets if you want to, but right now we just do them really lazily. We add like random endpoints into our app, and that becomes a command at development time, right? Clear cache is the command I wish I had in the file new app, and I think I'm actually going to go add that probably after this. But the other things we do are like empty database, reinitialize, migrate, those kinds of things, right? The code that you have to write and that you can't just magically trigger when your app is running, we give you a place to magically trigger it. And then you can customize these, package them up, share them, with your team, or just ship it as part of your code base if that's what you want to do. I'm not your boss, whatever. And then all these things, are culminated in the dashboard. And so the dashboard is what people think of when they think of Aspire for the most part, because it's the thing that you can look at. But the dashboard is really just a way to look at data. Right? It's not, the dashboard is not very smart. It just reads what Aspire tells it to read. And so there's a bunch of stuff with the traces and the endpoints and the structure logs and the metrics and blah, 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 blah. And honestly, the best way to figure out if like all the different things of it is just to use it yourself. You could just watch me scroll around all day, but I don't think you'd actually learn that much, so I'm not going to do that. Yeah, okay. We showed stop and restart in the demo, but one thing that's cool here is you'll notice there are errors on some of my APIs. And so it actually knows when it's throwing a warn or a fail, and I can click on those and go straight to the error. And then if I want to, like again, test a failure mode and just turn something off. And then you can see all the errors pop up, and you see everything that's going to throw an error when that thing turns off. It's a really easy, kind of quick way to do it. So integrations, like I talked about, we have those hosting ones in the app host and the client ones in the projects. But again, the app host can start anything. It can start any executable or container you want it to start. It's super flexible. We don't lock you into just the integrations that exist, although we have a bunch. These are some of the ones that are in the box right now. And by in the box, I mean the Aspire first-party team is building them in our open source repository. But we also have partners such as Amazon, who maintain their own integrations. And right now it's just one that exposes the CDK. But various different things for you to pull up their types of containers, like DynamoDB was the demo I saw yesterday, or whatever else it is. And we also have the community toolkit, which I mentioned, which is something that's not new to Aspire. The community toolkits have existed traditionally more for like the UI-heavy platforms, like Windows and Maui, and then there was an MVVM one that made MVVM like not the worst thing in the world. And now we have the Aspire one. And so the way that this works, it's part of the .NET Foundation. So we, the Aspire team, don't fully own it, although it is held to the standard, something in the .NET Foundation is held to. And there's a committee in which we have a member who makes sure that all of the integrations going in are of a certain level of quality and fit the roadmap and whatever it is. And then if at some point we think as the Aspire team, like, hey, we should really make this legit. We should really make it more legit than it already is. Or we need to do some weird things with this that we don't want to make the community deal with. We can always lift it into our Aspire repo because it's all open source. But for the most part, the community toolkit has been going so well that we're just letting them cook. Every day I wake up to a new integration and I'm like, please, I don't want to update my slide anymore. This is like 3 months old. I could not fit all the logos anymore. And so this is what it would look like to add a Python container. Say that you have an inference model that runs in Python. This is what it would look like to just add it with a Docker file, which you can just create kind of however. There's some mounting stuff. I don't know how the containers work because I came right into Aspire and I I skipped all the hard stuff. It's like learning how to drive with a Tesla instead of like a stick shift. It was a bad idea. Now I'm going back and I'm feeling all this pain and I'm like, oh God, how does anyone ship anything? I don't know. But we have like a Python integration which cleans up a lot of this stuff and does basically the same thing just with 3 lines of code. So again, flexible. I'm gonna say that 100 times because I wanna make sure I get across the point that we're not locking you into things. If you decide our Python integration doesn't spin things up the right way, you say, fine, I'll just do it on a Docker file. I don't care. We also have support for functions in preview. The reason functions don't exist already is because when they created the functions experience for debugging, they used a different builder pattern, like niche technical detail, because ours just didn't exist yet, and we use the standard new one, iHost application builder, which is different than iHost builder. Why? I don't know. Someone made that decision, not me. So we had to basically go into functions and rewrite how they initiate a function, how they instantiate it in .NET. But now you can wire them up in your app host, and we're working on deployment. The only reason it's in preview is because it doesn't actually do the deployment with AZD properly yet. So we can't really call it a real Aspire integration because it only half works for the whole story. But if you're running them locally, go right ahead. There's a demo tomorrow that I believe Paul is doing in Scott Hunter and my advanced Aspire talk, which I was told Paul is going to crash and do a functions demo. And I said, oh no, does that work? And Paul said, yeah. And I said, never mind, cool. We have a very robust samples repo. This is like Damien Edwards' simultaneous most important thing and most dreaded thing of all time. So a lot of the integrations are demonstrated in here. It's easier to see all of the things you can do with the app host if you go into the samples repo and just see, right? But what I want to show you now is our sort of real app. This is the app we always show at the past couple .NET Confs. It's eShop. There was like an original eShop, and then we totally revamped it. And it is somewhat complicated now, which is cool. It has some AI stuff. And it is a really good example for Aspire because it's actually like a proper distributed application. And so in here, if I minimize all this junk, I have a lot of stuff. And this is actually that architecture model I showed in the beginning of the slides. That's what this is. It's eShop. And so ton of APIs, ton of stuff, some random infrastructure projects, components, API, blah, blah, blah. And if I go into my app host project, you can see how we're actually wiring all these things up. So I would say the hardest part about the app host, in my opinion, is making sure you put things in the correct order. You can always copy paste things, but I'll be like, okay, my API is wired up. Now I will add my database, and then I'll be like, oh, wait, I have to do that before so I can do the database and then I can with reference and blah, blah, blah. So just, copy paste. It's your friend. We're adding a Redis cache, we're adding RabbitMQ, we're adding Postgres with a specific image, with a specific tag for the image, with the container lifetime we talked about. We're adding a bunch of databases to that Postgres instance. And then we're launching all of our endpoints and APIs, and we're wiring those things up. We're waiting for things to be ready. We're doing with references, blah, blah, blah. We're doing OLAMA. If it's true or false. So that in this case, if we wanted to run the AI model locally with OLAMA, we could. If we wanted to run it on the cloud with OpenAI, we could. But I'm not going to bother because then I have to put in keys that I never remember how to find. And then we have a function here that is, telling it you should use HTTP for the endpoints instead of HTTPS for whatever reason, right? Super custom. And while this runs too, I'll just show you quickly, the service defaults project has much more than just the extensions. We added things for auth, claims principal, OpenAPI, so you can see scalar from the endpoint that actually Aspire spins up, which is really awesome. And we're going to give it a few seconds. What else is interesting in here? I mean, there's a lot. We're just going to let it cook. Oh, testing is cool. There is a, you can test with Aspire, right? These are just app host projects. You can tell because they have the little Aspire logo, the little teeny purple triangle. But you can run a separate app host to test things. You can run it all under the same app host. You can run your tests exactly as they are today and start things up individually like you did before. One of the things we're looking at in the short term, and by short term I mean the next year because we're Microsoft, then everything takes us a really long time, is the ability to potentially mock out resources. So literally like mock for resources, which would be really cool. So instead of having to test actually hitting the cache, you could just give it the parameters or the signature and blah, 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 blah. Every time we talk about it, someone's like, yeah, we should really do that. That's so cool. And then we're like, okay, who's going to do it? And everyone's like, crickets. Testing. So not 9.1. 9.1 will be out before the end of February, maybe 9.2. So this is going to spin up eShop here. You can also run this dashboard standalone if you don't want to do all the app host stuff. It requires some command line stuff. And then it requires some auth stuff so that you can get into the dashboard, but it is possible if you're interested. Okay, so you just saw everything start running in like its kind of like startup weird state, not healthy yet. The health check hadn't completed whatever I defined the health check to be. This was actually really, really fast because I have all these containers in my Docker already from literally running this version of eShop. So even though I had turned off my computer yesterday and opened it up today, it's going to be able to use the same images. And now it's starting all these things. They're waiting for each other. They're talking. Yay, everything is so fun. Yay. And then I need to find the web app and open that. Have a sip of tea. I love tea. I love coffee. I'm insane, so I need it. But I love tea. And there is nothing better about being in Britain than like the normalization of just getting tea everywhere all the time. Anytime I'm in like, mainland Europe, I'll be like, can I get a tea with some steamed milk at like a Starbucks? And they're like, what? Why are you doing that? And I'm like, I'm so sorry, please. It's a comforting drink. Leave me alone. Although I did get some real judgment from the waitress at a restaurant the other day when I was like, can I have an English breakfast tea? And she goes, a breakfast tea? And I was like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to insult you. This is loading for infinite. Oh, because there's a breakpoint in here, which is cool. So yeah, you can see I'm actually debugging through this whole thing. We're just going to hit continue a few times here. There's some unhandled exceptions, but they're not actually throwing up my app. They're going to let it keep going. Oh, yeah. There's timeouts. It's doing all this thing for me. That's Poly. And now I can see this horrible trace. But you could see that for a while, the website, the front end actually stayed alive, even though the application was in a totally broken state, right? Like, it retried it probably 10 or 15 times. We can look in the logs. Once I finally got through all those breakpoints or those exceptions, it was able to recover and spin things back up. And so this is just a website. You click things. I'm not going to do the auth because it always seems to break for me. But like, you add them to cart. You buy things. It's fake. It's all fake money. And so in the web app, we can actually go look. The errors have already run out, which is nice. But if we go look in the logs here, you can see YARP is doing stuff. And then there's a bunch of execution attempts in here and stack traces. And so I can actually see probably what Visual Studio is breaking on, but in here, without, if I wasn't in Visual Studio debugging and it just would have kept going, right? Instead of me hitting continue, I would see those things here too. And it's Poly that's doing that restart, and that's another thing we turn on for you. And then if I go into my structured logs, I can see how all of these things are talking to each other. And then if I go into my traces, I can see all of the individual spans for all these things. So this is like all of the get for the product images like 100 times because it kept retrying because for 2 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second, 1 second, or 1.8 seconds. Kept trying to call the catalog API and it wasn't responding because my application was broken. So magic. It also is regularly checking the health of these things, which you can set up. So like make sure it's healthy X amount of times, right? And yeah, this is all local. This is all local. I cloned eShop on Monday when I was giving this demo to a different group. And I have not touched it since, and I did not have to do anything. And so when you onboard a new employee to your team, or God forbid, your poor little intern, and you're like, okay, here's our code base. So you have to talk to this guy to get this script, and then you also have to run these 3 files, and then here are the instructions to actually start debugging, right? You don't have to do that anymore. That's much better. Okay, that's eShop. Oh, I'm doing great on time. I am the best. Thank you very much. Few more slides, one more demo. and then I will let you ask some questions and get out of here and go have some lunch. Deployment. So I've kind of been breezing by it because it is this separate part of the Aspire story, blah, blah, blah. What you can do with deployment is whatever you are doing today. So however you decide that you're wiring up your ports and you're sticking your secrets in things, and whether that's Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions or Argo or Jenkins or insert name here, you can continue doing that. And Aspire does not lock you into any cloud. So if you're deploying to AWS, if you're deploying to on-prem, Aspire is still an option for you, especially locally, right? And then what we have is this thing called the Azure Developer CLI. And we wired that up through Visual Studio. So if you want to right-click publish, you can. I don't know if people do that anymore. It kind of became a meme like a while ago. So I don't know if we do that, but it's an option. What the Azure Developer CLI does, and it's AZD, so there's the Azure CLI, AZ, and then the Azure Developer CLI, AZD. Again, not my naming decision. It's fine. But what AZD does is it takes your app host, it reads it, it translates it, and it sticks it on container apps without you doing anything. You can also stop it kind of halfway through and get like the translated version and edit the translation if that matters to you. But container apps is really like the foolproof first place to stick a container in the cloud, especially if you aren't ready to dive into Kubernetes, right? It's another thing that you just have to learn and figure out and all of that. And for people like me, who every time you hear Kubernetes, you're like, nah, that's okay. Container apps is a great choice. It's also a really good choice for staging environments where you know you don't need all the crazy customization of Kubernetes, but you still want it to be able to do things like scale to zero, run in containers, and do the correct things, right? And so that's what container apps is for. And to get Aspire up there, it is literally AZD init, and then if you're not logged in, AZD auth login, and then AZD up. And so what init does is init finds the app host project or file, and it kind of translates that into bicep or YAML, but bicep is the default. And then it sticks that in a folder. And then when you do AZD up, it takes that with all your stuff. It leaves the app host, because the app host is a development tool, and now it knows what the app host is. It doesn't need it anymore, and it deploys the rest of it up into container apps. There's a command called infrasynth, which is how you can see that translation layer. So a lot of people in CI pipelines, because they're like, we can't just say AZD up, that's just, What they'll do is they'll do AZD infrasynth in their pipeline, run some checks against it, or change specific things if they need to in it, and then do AZD up, or deploy it however they're doing bicep deployment today. Container apps, if you used Aspire a year ago, you could not do things such as set a custom domain. We fixed all of that. That was like the first step to the overall deployment journey. And so AZD is just our first target because we work like next to the Azure people, virtually next to them. I can call them on Teams and be like, hey, what? But we're going to continue working on adding more. The one that we've been hearing a lot is Terraform. Like, we want to Aspire translation into Terraform, and then you can just use exactly how you're doing your Terraform today up, or anything else. But AZD is what we're putting a lot of love and work into right now, and you can do things like just set scale to zero, very basic things, and these things are translated into your bicep, and then you do AZD up, not AZ. And all of these things just plop into container apps. And so this is like for eShop, it's like 10, 15 minutes, which is why I'm not doing it live. If I was really smart and fun, what I would have done was been like at the beginning, like, magic, blah, blah, blah. Oh, at the end, there will be a surprise. But I don't do that because I forget, and then it's just not good. What you can see here is a resource group called eShop. And I named it Elevate after the event I was on Monday when I deployed this the first time. And it's got all my stuff. It's got the APIs. It's got a key vault thing. It's got more APIs. It's got a Redis cache running a container. It's got Postgres running a container. You can use this resource visualizer tool to see this very chaotic diagram of how they're all related to each other. People are like, yeah, this is so helpful. I'm like, this just looks like spaghetti to me. But I'm sure for people who do cloud, this is very helpful. The DevOps of us, the DevOps among us, right? It's okay. Don't be afraid. Like, this is loud. But you can see, like, the key vault is really wired into everything here. There's this container registry on Azure, on ACA, that is where all these images go into. And what also is really good about AZD and Azure Container Apps is these are all in a VNet. So you don't have to worry about, like, protecting your ports or anything. It's just whatever you expose to the internet as external is exposed. And then all of the communication between these things is fully behind a virtual network, which if you've tried to do that by hand in Kubernetes, you know it's like, security, terrifying. The last thing I'll show you up here in the deployment world is that there is a dashboard that has been, in my log workspace, that has been deployed somewhere. I wonder which one it is. Let's see. Oh, I know where it is. It's in this overview up top. Nope, go. The Azure portal keeps changing. I don't know if everyone else has this issue or it's just me. I can never find anything. This is the container apps environment, so basically the VNet that's holding my containers. In this, you can see it's got Kita, it's got Dapper, but it's also got the dashboard. And the dashboard is now on some static URL. It does do auth. You saw the SSO URL go by, so only me, someone in this Azure word for thing that you put your stuff in, security, can get to it. But now I can actually see the exact same thing I was seeing before, just in the actual cloud and how it's running. And so I can see this one right up, no issues, click around, blah, 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 go look at my traces. Oh my gosh, everything's working. One thing I will mention about the dashboard that we get as a question a lot is it is a rolling buffer. And so this is really a good diagnostic tool. It is not a place to store your data and use for like long-term analytics and storage, right? Use log analytics, use Azure App Insights, use Grafana or Prometheus, whatever it is. Like, go use your real things. This is a diagnostic tool. We are looking at ways that maybe we could, hook up Prometheus on a container as the back end, right? And then Aspire does the magic egress for you. But we're not, we have a lot of stuff to do. Okay? We got a lot of stuff to do. But it is a really, really good diagnostic tool. And if you're starting to have issues with your website, this is kind of the first place to go and see, like, oh, my API is erroring. Oh, that's not good. What's going on here? Yeah. And you still have all the same things. So now instead of futzing around the Azure portal and logging into a bunch of different consoles, you can just like look at it here. Whoa, magic. Yeah. Anything else I want to show in this whole thing before I go back to my slides and wrap up? I don't think so. Yeah, I think I showed all of it. Nice. So let's go to the slides and finish up a few things, which is first and foremost, the slide you can all take a picture of. I know it's kind of small, sorry. I know it is GitHub, com, okay? I realized that too late. Do not use OCR and try to paste that into your browser. It will not work. Write github.com like a normal person. Aspire, the docs are like, we add a new doc, I swear, like every day or two. We take a PR, whether it's editing or adding a new one. And so the docs have a lot of room to grow, but they're all there for existing integrations and things that you need. The docs are open source, so you can just file issues on them if you want to see stuff, which feel free. There is the Get Started walkthrough. And so if you're on a Mac, to install Aspire, you just have to get .NET and then tell .NET to get the Aspire templates, which is literally one line of code. If you're on Windows, VS does it for you, or you could do the same thing in VS Code. The samples, which we talked about. And then Aspire itself is open source. We try to do our planning in the open. We are, as an engineering team, learning how to triage things. Whoa. What? No, externally and in a timely manner. And so we've all of the engineers who work on Aspire, it's a very small team. Everyone sits in GitHub and reads issues and responds to things, right? So we're all on there. There's also a Discord. So if you're a power user, or if you're building it as custom integrations, or if you have some really, really niche use case, you can join the .NET Discord, which you can find on the .NET website somehow. There is a link somewhere. and then chat with us in there. We try to keep an eye on Reddit, but Reddit is kind of mean. So usually like we just every once in a while we hop in there, but not often. So the best place to go is always GitHub first, and then you can try those other avenues of aspiring to talk to us. That was only my first Aspire pun of the day. Also, we have a Microsoft booth here for the first time in like 5 years, because Microsoft was like, oh man, we should probably have a booth at a conference that's all about our stuff. Oh, damn, that would be a good idea. Sorry, again, internet. Get .NET 9 if you don't. You don't have to have it for Aspire, but you should get it anyways. The booth is right downstairs, right at the bottom of the stairs to the left. I will be hanging out there on and off throughout the day. There are people much cooler than me that are also hanging out there. So if you have questions, if you want to come up and be like, well, will Aspire work with this? Well, will Aspire work with this? Well, will Aspire work with this? To which I will say yes, by the way. Everything is a yes. Come and ask me. And then we also, I don't know how much time we have left for private meetings, because I know this is the middle of day 2, but you can fill out that form. I'm not available for private meetings because I knew that I would be mostly at the booth. So if you want to talk to me, just come find me after or at the booth. And join us online. Join us on all the things. Please try Aspire and complain about it or love it or praise it or share it with your friends. Give me more quotes, okay? I need the quotes so I can go to my leadership and tell them to keep giving me more engineers to work on this. So when you have a good quote, shoot it my way. My email is Maddie, M-A-D-D-Y, @Microsoft.com. Very cool, I know. And that's it. So we have a few minutes, so I will open it up for questions for the room. And there's a mic up here, so probably come use that. Yeah, come use that. But yeah, thank you. All right. Yeah.
Hi there. If you've got external dependencies that you're dependent on, working locally, say there's some shared resource, can you add that into Aspire as well?
So the question is, if you have external dependencies, which I imagine you mean like another team's stack or whatever, right? Or another repo or whatever it is. So yeah, the multi-repo story for Aspire, it works. Like you can submodule things in Git like you would any other way. The solution, the Aspire app host belongs to one solution, so you would have to make sure that you wire that up correctly, but you can use one app host to control things across multiple repositories. I wouldn't, because that means that you could clone one repository and have it in a broken state and actually need both, which is probably like not great Git stuff. We've also seen people with 2 app hosts and just running them side by side, right? Or, one of the repos they run statically and then they shove the endpoint that they need into the other Aspire app. As far as like external dependencies, whether that's NuGet packages or something that they've deployed to a staging environment that you hit, all of those things are available. If they're in the same Azure tenant, you can do all the fancy auth stuff too. You just connect to the resource in the app host, even if it's not yours. You just have to make sure that you're able to authenticate to it. If it's a staging URL that just has like a token you authenticate with in the URL, that's super easy. You just plop that in an environment variable or whatever. But we do have, so internally, we have the Microsoft Copilot team that just built the redesigned apps for it are using that's their internal name. They're using Aspire for everything. And so now they have a bunch of other teams building extensions on top of their stack. So Xbox is building AI into some of their stuff, and they are building on their stack. So Copilot has their own app host, and Xbox has their own app host, so that if they change the API signature, they can test everything locally, but they can also just go hit staging if they don't need to change the API signature on their side. So super flexible. Yeah. What else? Nothing? Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Can the deployment tooling integrate with existing Azure deployments, like naming conventions and
Yeah.
what platform team have done?
Yeah. So the question is about if the deployment tooling can integrate with things that are already deployed in the cloud or provisioned. Yes, totally. So as long as you name it the same thing, it'll just go up there. The demos we show are usually like provisioning something new because that's cool and fun. But it does connect to old things or existing things, not old. And yeah, so you can choose which to provision new to or which to hook up to existing things. So All the names and stuff are customizable. Anything else? Yeah.
Can you run like sort of init containers to bootstrap your databases or whatever?
What type of containers?
Like init containers.
Oh, init containers to bootstrap your databases. Totally. Yep. Databases are hard. Anyone who is like a database hardo knows that this is like, there's a lot of strategies when it comes to migrations and all that stuff. So yeah, so you can run an init container. Things in the dashboard do have a finished state. So if you init something and that does your migrations or whatever it is, that's totally possible. You can also do that in code, like with EF and any framework, in your API or wherever you do hit the database. You can have an endpoint for your migration, or you can handle your migration at a regular interval or whatever it is. So yeah, good question. Anything else? Yeah.
Is there anything like resource visualizer outside Azure?
Anything like resource visualizer outside Azure. I'm sure there are in other tools. For Aspire, right now we only have the list. However, there is a PR up to do exactly that. So resource visualizer inside of the Aspire dashboard. The only reason we haven't merged it yet is because we want to make sure it's accessible and meets all of like our design standards and everything. The next thing that's coming out is also parent-child relationships. So if you have Postgres and like an instance of Postgres, and then you have like 4 different databases, they'll actually be linked into that single Postgres thing, and you can drop and expand and all those things. So once that comes, then we'll finish up the resource visualizer PR and get that merged in. Yeah.